Welcome to PM Ready, your guide to becoming PMP certified. This lesson focuses on the project charter. This is one of a series of lessons that focus on key documents and other deliverables related to project management. This lesson covers the project charter's purpose, its key characteristics, the roles and responsibilities relative to the project charter and who's responsible for what, the relationship of the project charter to other documents, such as the needs assessment, the business case, the benefits management plan, and the project management plan, and some details regarding the contents of the project charter. At the same time, the lesson covers the assumption log, which is created alongside the project charter during the develop project charter process. The PMBOK guide defines the project charter as a document issued by the project initiator or sponsor that formally authorizes the existence of a project and provides the project manager with the authority to apply organizational resources to project activities. Notice the careful wording in this definition. This is a definition that has been crafted and honed over the years to be what it is today. This document is issued by the project initiator or sponsor, not the project manager. Although it is quite common for the project manager to do the work of creating the project charter, it is the project initiator or sponsor who issues it. Now, I would recommend it as a best practice that the project manager be heavily involved in, if not leading, the effort to create the project charter. However, this is a key document that the project sponsor must issue because the project sponsor is the one who must take accountability for the project charter and the project as a whole. Also note that it is the project charter that authorizes the existence of a project. This is basically your kickoff document for starting a project. It also provides the project manager with authority, and this means that the project manager is identified and named in this document, so you know who the project manager is. The authority that's given to the project manager is to apply organizational resources to project activities. Notice that this is worded in such a way that it includes money, resources, physical facilities, team members, and so on, whatever is needed in order to get the project going. This is the type of document that you should be able to take around to the various leaders within the organization to show that the project has been authorized and to help you get the resources that you need. A project charter does establish a partnership between those that are requesting the project and those that are going to be implementing it and making it happen, but it's not a contract. If, on the other hand, you have a project that needs to be outsourced and be performed by an external vendor, then you will need a formal contract, and that's something we'll cover in procurement. However, even if you are on the receiving end of a contract and your organization is developing a project on behalf of someone else, you'll have a contract in place, but you may also still want to have a project charter just so that everyone within your performing organization is all on the same page about what needs to be done and how. Although the PMBOK guide points out that the project charter can be developed by the sponsor of the project, in my experience, I find that this rarely happens. Usually, it's up to the project manager, and the project manager can get help from the sponsor, of course, also from the PMO, from the program manager, the portfolio manager, and other key stakeholders. But it's usually that the project sponsor will delegate this responsibility for developing the project charter to the project manager. Projects are initiated by some entity that is external to the project, such as the sponsor, the program, or the program management office, or a portfolio or governing body, or some other authorized representative. What this means simply is that projects don't start themselves. They are started by someone before the project is officially a project. And this means that there are key stakeholders out there that have been thinking about this project and approving it, that you should identify and consult when it comes to developing the project charter. Another important aspect of the roles and responsibilities relative to the project charter is that the sponsor should be at a level that is appropriate to procure the funding and commit the resources necessary for the project. Does the project sponsor have sufficient authority within the organization to allocate or acquire the people and the resources that you'll need for the project? Is the sponsor high enough up in the organization? If not, you need to find someone who is. On the other hand, you need to maintain a careful balance. If you go too high up the organization, the sponsor may become unavailable and unable to participate in the decisions necessary to manage the project. I'm sure you can think of some examples of projects that you've been managing in which the sponsor has not been available to you as you would have wished, or, on the other end, where the sponsor has been available but not had the authority necessary to get the resources you need. In order to understand the project charter, it's valuable to know where it fits relative to other important project management documents and how these other documents help you to develop the project charter and how the project charter in turn is used elsewhere. In this case, you can see that projects start with the identification of a need. This is followed by a needs assessment, then the creation of a business case, and the creation of a project benefits management plan. All of this prior work is then used as inputs to the develop project charter process, particularly the business case. The project charter, in turn, is used as a key input to the creation of the project management plan and all of its component plans. Because the project charter is a high-level description of the project, it is a key document that is used to guide the development of the project management plan as well as to guide the management of the project throughout its life cycle. So from what you know so far about the purpose of the project charter, what do you think should be in it? Think about the documents that are created before it and how it's used. First of all, you should have a description of the project purpose. This will come from your business case and needs assessment. You should also have measurable project objectives and related success criteria. These, of course, come from the business case and from the project benefits management plan. The project approval requirements determine what constitutes project success, who decides the project is successful, and who signs off on the project. The project charter also includes the high-level requirements of the project. These will have come from key stakeholders who you have worked with or others have worked with to create the needs assessment and business case from which you can draw some of these high-level requirements. You'll also have a high-level project description, including its boundaries and key deliverables. Some of this should already be known, but if not, developing this will be part of the develop project charter process. Part of creating the project charter also includes some initial high-level analysis of the overall project risk. Those project risks should be identified and enumerated in the project charter. Similarly, the summary milestone schedule should be included in the charter. Any key milestones or deadlines that are anticipated or necessary should be included here early on. At this early stage of the development of the project, you may well have some pre-approved financial resources. You may have a budget that's already been identified for this project. At the very least, you'll probably have some expectations on the part of the key stakeholders as to how much this project is going to cost. You should also list the key stakeholders that have been identified so far. From these key stakeholders, you should have worked with them to understand what the project approval requirements are. In other words, what is required in order for this project to be considered complete and approved. The project exit criteria should be included, and this spells out what the conditions are that need to be met in order to close or cancel the project or any phase of the project. The project charter will also have an assignment of a project manager and outline the project manager's responsibility and level of authority. It will also, of course, specifically name the sponsor and the authority of the sponsor. Remember that although it's both common and preferable that the project manager participate in the writing of the project charter, the project manager is not the one who approves the project charter. All of this work that you do has to be reviewed and approved by the project sponsor for the project charter to be valid. How is the project charter used? The project charter is the key document to define the overall project at a high level. It's sort of like your elevator statement for the whole project. In fact, it probably includes an elevator statement of the project that you can use in communicating with other key stakeholders and as you advance through the project. But this key document will be important throughout the life cycle of the project to evaluate the progress of the project and to ensure alignment of the project throughout its life cycle, make sure that it's aligned with all of the business requirements, the business case, the needs assessment, and the strategic objectives of the organization. This is the document that guides the development and maintenance of the project management plan and all of its component plans. It's a key input to all of these project management processes. As it is such an important document, it should be reviewed at the beginning of each phase of a project. Don't let this document become out of date. As things change during the project, keep your project charter up to date and review it periodically to make sure that it is kept up to date. The project charter is my favorite project management document. It's the bridge between the business needs that have been explored prior to the initiation of the project and the more detailed project management plan that's used to manage the details of the project. This is such a key document that whenever I'm brought in to rescue a project in distress, the two things I ask for first are who's the project sponsor and where's the project charter. Usually it's not too hard for people to answer the question of who's the project sponsor. Sometimes, but not usually. But very often, if a project is in distress, the project charter has been neglected at best. Very often, there isn't a project charter at all, or it's so out of date, and no one knows where it is or what it contains. And this is why the project has gone off track, is because it doesn't have this small, simple guiding document that helps to define the big picture and the guidelines for the project overall. The project purpose will help to guide decisions in coming up with the project management plan and in managing the project all throughout the life cycle of the project. It will also help every time there's a change proposed to the project to double check to see if the proposed changes are still consistent with and in alignment with the whole purpose of the project. The measurable project objectives and related success criteria will similarly be useful in determining what sorts of quality metrics and other metrics are used to judge the success of the project as it's being developed. High-level requirements and a high-level project description and its boundaries and key deliverables will of course be important inputs to developing the scope of the project and the scope management plan. Overall project risk will be the starting point for your identification and analysis of risks. The summary milestone schedule will be the starting point for developing the project schedule. As you develop the project budget, you'll also need to start with whatever the pre-approved financial resources are, if any. As you identify key stakeholders and come up with a plan for engaging those key stakeholders, you'll start with those that have been identified in the project charter. Project approval requirements and exit criteria will come in very handy when it comes to quality management and to project closure, as well as project procurement. At the same time that you develop the project charter, you'll also begin the assumption log. This log is used to record all assumptions and constraints throughout the project lifecycle. Although it starts early, it lasts throughout the project, and you should record all assumptions and constraints no matter whether they're high level or low level or where they come from. They all go into this assumption log, which starts here. At this stage, you'll also be working with a lot of key stakeholders, and the items that you put into the assumption log may be linked to some specific stakeholders, and in many cases they should be, because much of the information about your key stakeholders and the relative power and interest and engagement that they have relative to this project are based on assumptions, and these assumptions should be recorded early on in the assumption log. Also, if you find that there are any constraints associated with how you should interact with specific stakeholders, any specific communication requirements or availability limitations can all be recorded here. You don't want surprises later on because of a constraint or assumption that was built in that you forgot about, or that other key players on the project team forgot about. It's also possible that the assumption log may have been created even before the project charter is started. In fact, it will include high-level strategic and operational assumptions and constraints that were identified during the business case before the project was even initiated. And so those assumptions and constraints need to be identified and pulled into the project charter so that they're not forgotten and buried in the business case or needs assessment. If you take the time to think about it, you'll find that you're identifying assumptions and constraints all over the place, from the time that you're defining technical specifications through the time that you're coming up with estimates and putting together the schedule, identifying and analyzing risks, managing procurements, resources, and planning for quality. Let me give you some examples of assumptions. One is that you may assume that the quality of the data in the database is good, and it may or may not be. You may assume that the system interfaces will work. I was on a project not too long ago in which this assumption turned out not to be true, and it required extra time and effort for us to get those system interfaces working. Another assumption might be that personnel will be available when you need them, that key stakeholders in charge of participating in the design will be able to make timely decisions and provide meaningful feedback. This may or may not be a valid assumption. On some projects, it has been, and on others, we've had key stakeholders that have a really hard time making decisions on the user interface design. You may assume that the data security requirements won't change in the middle of the project. You may also assume that vendors are available for key components, and so you start a process of procurement only to find out later that the vendors that you hoped would be there simply aren't. One assumption could be that customer demand will continue to hold or increase at the same rate that it has for the past few years. You could assume that sales projections will be as forecasted. These are the kinds of things that need to be periodically reviewed. You could also assume and record in the assumption log that inflation and exchange rates will not change significantly. I had one large project that had this problem. It wasn't a project that I managed, but one that I was involved in that was to outsource the IT call center and IT support for a large organization, and there were some fairly significant cost savings projected. However, during the course of the project, exchange rates between the two countries involved changed so much that all of the savings simply evaporated. You may also assume that prices of key commodities such as copper would stay above, say, $2 a pound for the next 5 years. You need to check on that periodically, because if your project is dependent on that price and the price doesn't hold, then you need to reassess whether the project is still worth pursuing or should be put on hold. You may also assume that operating costs will not rise any higher than inflation. I've seen this one also fall apart. One example was when oil prices started to spike, purchasing tires for very large equipment became almost prohibitively expensive and very difficult to find. Tires that used to cost thousands were costing tens of thousands, many tens of thousands. Do you use project charters in your organization, just with a different name? Do you ever find that you have trouble wrapping up and closing projects even though the work is done? If so, approval requirements and exit criteria can help you. Do stakeholders disagree about whether the project meets requirements? Here again, the project charter can help. Do you have trouble with stakeholders trying to add features that don't support the project objectives, that aren't consistent with the project purpose or the related success criteria and objectives? Do you discover key stakeholders after the project is well underway and then have to go back and revisit the requirements? Could that be because enough time wasn't spent putting together the key stakeholders list? Do you find that your sponsor is ever unavailable or unable to resolve issues? All of these sorts of questions and difficulties are the kinds of things that can be avoided or mitigated by having spent the time to put together a good project charter and keeping it up to date. This lesson has briefly reviewed some of those pre-project documents, the needs assessment, the business case, and the benefits management plan that are used to help develop the project charter, which authorizes the project, identifies the sponsor and the project manager, and provides a high-level overview and guide for the project. It has also covered the assumption log, as well as the fact that the project management plan is based on important high-level information from the project charter. More information about the project charter and the assumption log can be found in the PMBOK guide on these pages. PM Ready is a publication of PM Guaranteed and is based on the Project Management Institute's PMBOK guide.